Welcome to One Mission Podcast, and we have an opportunity today to hear from someone who is a premier leader in Southern Baptist life, the president and CEO of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. And Dr. Brent Leatherwood has been in that position now how long? Refresh my memory.
Well, it's kind of a long story. I was interim president for a year. So this is going into my fourth year, and so been doing it. It's an incredible privilege to get to work with people like you, Dr. Lance.
Oh, glad to be a part of the team. And tell us about your family, your wife and children.
Wife and three children. We live here in Nashville, Tennessee, where the ERLC is headquartered. Of course, we also have an office in Washington, D.C., but I'm a lifelong Southern Baptist, and we attend the church at Avenue South here, and we love it because our pastor, he's actually the one that introduced us, and so we'd follow that man across the globe.
Oh, really? Now that's a charming aspect of the relationship of a pastor and church member. Yeah.
You want to know what's great about it? He invited us to a young professional event, and my wife and I were the only young professionals invited. So.
Oh, okay. Well, you were the event then.
Yeah, I suppose so.
Tell us about your children. You have some great children. Tell us about them.
That's right. We've got three kids. They're in sixth grade, fourth grade, and second grade, and they keep us very busy. This is a busy season of life, having a 12-year-old, 10-year-old, and 8-year-old. So everything from dance to Little League baseball and everything in between.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. So they're doing pretty well. Yeah.
They are.
And how long ago, if you don't mind me asking, how long ago was the event at the school that took place?
Yes. Well, so for your listeners who wouldn't know, they are three survivors of a mass shooting that took place at their private Christian school here in town. It's been 2 years. We're coming up actually on the 2-year mark in March. Yeah. And but they're all, honestly, the Lord has been kind in this season. He's been walking with us and ministering to us. And look, not every day is great. There are definitely some challenges. Yeah. When you live through such a horrific event. But God is good. So.
Well, Brent, we've been praying for them and for your family. And I just thought, since we had you to just sort of help our listeners know something of your personal experience in that regard. We hate that they had to go through that, but I'm glad that the testimony is good thus far.
Yes, sir.
But you have an array of issues in ethics and religious liberty. We thank you for what you do in standing up for religious liberty in Southern Baptist life. That is in our DNA with a capital D, capital N, capital A, and also the very important public policies you help advocate for us and even inform us. And today is an opportunity to inform us on something very important relating to current events right now and some legislation. Do you want to begin just by introducing it, and then we might ask questions?
Sure. So maybe just talking broadly. So the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, we're the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention. And generally what that means is we get a lot of attention for the ways that we speak into the public square, the issues that we advocate for in front of our nation's elected officials. And in doing so, we're trying to communicate the priorities of our Southern Baptist churches to elected officials. But at the same time, we also come alongside churches and equip pastors to think deeply about the issues of the day, the way that the gospel informs us about these chaotic cultural times that we're living in. Yeah. And one of the issues that's been at the forefront recently has been this issue of transgender surgeries and transgender interventions. And honestly, we all know this intuitively, and the news tells us, the science tells us, those interventions, first and foremost, they are radical and experimental in nature, and they do deep harm to really anyone that undergoes them, but particularly children. And so a couple of years ago, here in the state of Tennessee, it passed a law actually prohibiting this practice on children. And your friend and mine, Dr. Randy Davis at the
Yes.
Tennessee Baptist
Yeah.
Mission Board, we teamed up to endorse that legislation and affirm it, and encourage, in doing so, try to encourage other states to follow Tennessee's lead. And I'm proud to say at this point, over a majority of states in the country, 26, have now passed either some sort of prohibition or regulation against these sort of practices.
Right.
Well, as these things occur, it was challenged with a lawsuit about the appropriateness of the law. And it recently made its way all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's actually how we got together the idea to hop on the podcast here with you.
Right.
Was just to talk through that case and that law, and what it means for Southern Baptists.
Okay, let's do that. Just kind of walk us through that, because not everyone knows how this goes, and appealing and all the process legally that we have to encounter. So if you could walk us through that a little bit.
Sure, and this isn't unique to Tennessee. I mean, what we have seen is these so-called treatments. They're actually life-altering gender practices that are foisted upon children that, in many cases, are in some sort of emotional distress.
Yes.
They're struggling with their identity, and I don't mean to diminish the fact that there might be children facing that, but to think that if a child is dealing with that the answer is to run to these sorts of procedures that are so intrinsically and deeply harmful, that just strikes us as categorically the wrong way to go. And that's why we thought it was appropriate for legislators in Tennessee and, as I mentioned, these other states to take steps to stop it. But like I said, as inevitably would happen, you could guess there would be a lawsuit. This time it came from the ACLU, seeking to stop this law from taking effect. And it actually very quickly made its way all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. Generally, it takes several years for something to get through the court system. But this one actually went through very quickly. And so I actually had the opportunity to sit in on the oral arguments at the U.S. Supreme Court, and that was meaningful for me, not only because I'm a Tennessean and I really support this legislation, but also because it was one of the first instances where the ERLC devoted real resources to going out, finding a fellow Southern Baptist attorney who could draft what's called an amicus brief to file in this case on the side of the state of Tennessee. And we argued in that brief that we thought this was entirely appropriate. As a matter of fact, it's biblically sanctioned for the state to thwart harm that is being done to its citizens, and in this case, particularly children.
Absolutely.
So we made that case in our legal brief and submitted it before the court. And I'm proud to say that the Tennessee Baptist, they signed on to it with us. And we've been trying to look for opportunities in recent years, you know this, Dr. Lance, to team up with our state conventions.
Yes.
Because oftentimes when our pastors, our churches are facing these issues, they're not calling me first, they're calling you first.
Right.
And so we think it's incredibly important to partner up with y'all. And of course, behind that is the cooperative nature of what we do in the Southern Baptist Convention.
Yeah.
So filing this brief, it represented all of that. And so again, it was really meaningful for me to be in the room while these oral arguments were taking place.
Yeah. And so you say a total of 26 states now, so more than half the states have had some kind of law related to this. Okay. That's good to
That's
know.
right. More than half, and with the legislative sessions beginning at the state level now, we're hopeful that
Yes.
more states will join aboard. Some of them are going to kind of keep their powder dry until this Supreme Court decision comes out, but we're urging them to continue to take steps to protect children and ultimately really to go after honestly this cottage industry that's sprouted up
Yeah,
for these sorts of harmful transgender surgeries and interventions.
yeah, that is a big concern in Alabama. There is some of that cottage industry that you're talking about. I don't want to be too specific, but it is a money-making enterprise
Mm-hmm.
in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And there's some people
That's
profiting
exactly right.
from it. We have,
Yep.
as you well know, Greg Davis of the Alabama Citizens Action Program in Alabama.
He's a good friend. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he keeps us up to date, and right now he's at the state legislature. Yeah, I've heard him talk about the primary things they're talking about, but I've not heard him mention this, so I'll be sure and visit with him about that.
Alabama may be one of those states that has actually already passed a
I think we
prohibition.
have. That's why it's not mentioned on his radar. I'm almost certain. And that one would have been such a no-brainer for our people. It probably didn't get a lot of press. And current events right now, in a broad sense, we've never had a situation where a president had to declare we have two genders, which was rather unusual.
That's right.
In the creation order, we know that, but evidently our culture has gotten so far afield that they have to be reminded we do have two genders. And
That's right.
And a lot of that's going on, and it's playing out. I'm sure it'll be challenged legally in court, perhaps, but we'll see.
Well, and honestly, that's why we're paying attention to this case so much, because whether it's President Trump's executive orders or state laws like the ones in Tennessee, we want to urge lawmakers to understand that there's a biblical rationale behind this that needs to be respected. You and I know, your listeners will know this. God gave us what is good and right. There are two sexes, male and female, both created equally in his image. And our laws should respect that reality.
Yeah.
When I was in the Supreme Court, now I think it's important to add this. When I was in the Supreme Court in December, the case was being argued by the U.S. Solicitor General under President Biden. If those oral arguments happened today, they would actually be categorically different than what we heard in light of President Trump's executive order. But at that time, the federal government was really trying to diminish this case, and they were arguing that a legal principle known as heightened scrutiny should apply to this case, because they were trying to locate their objection to it in the world of discriminatory practice on the basis of sex. And should they win, honestly, should they win, it would open a Pandora's box about legal protections of all kinds, everything from restrooms to women's sports, which President Trump just signed an executive order just yesterday protecting women's sports. And so if the court were to buy the argument that was made under the Biden administration, frankly, all these executive orders that we've seen that we cheer on and that we affirm, those would all be overturned. And so that's why this case is actually very, very important.
Well, how do you
and we're going to be watching it closely.
How do you foresee it coming out? What do you think the end result will be?
Well, I'll be honest. Usually when there is a Supreme Court oral argument, I tune in to the audio via C-SPAN.
Right.
And to be in the room, obviously you hear everything that's going on verbally, but you also see the nonverbal cues, the body language of the Supreme Court justices. And to me, that was fascinating. So, for example, Justice Alito, he's a conservative on the court.
Right.
He came in with a point to prove, and I think that point to prove was very much about one, how inappropriate the federal government's arguments and the arguments advanced by the ACLU were. He almost seemed like offended that this case had even gotten to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then at the same time, as he made his points, he would turn to Justice Kavanaugh to make sure that the points he was making were being picked up by his fellow Justice Kavanaugh. And look, Justice Kavanaugh, he's a conservative too.
Right.
Some folks think he could potentially be a swing vote. I'm not sure that that's the case. I think the swing vote for sure would be Justice Gorsuch. But even then, I think we're looking at least a 5-4 majority that affirms the law and says that, yes, Tennessee and other states have the right to intervene when a child's life and health are put in jeopardy. And look, that what I just said, that should sound familiar to so many of your listeners because at its core, that's the pro-life argument.
It is.
We want the state to intervene when defenseless lives are in harm's way. And so whether that's in the womb or whether that in this instance is at some clinic attempting some sort of radical experimental surgery or radical experimental medicinal therapy, we want the state to intervene and say, no, that's inappropriate, and we're going to defend the rights of this child.
Well, I know you have a close relationship with our Speaker of the House of Representatives, Johnson, having been a trustee, a good Southern Baptist from Louisiana.
Yes, sir.
He and Steve Scalise both are from Louisiana, the leading members of the Republican Party and in the House of Representatives, however, by a very, very thin margin, just a hair margin there. Talk about your relationship with him, because to me, he's an interesting individual. And every time I hear him, I'm impressed with him. And I think he's the right man for the right moment.
We need to be praying for this man. So he is a fellow Southern Baptist. As you mentioned, he's from Louisiana. And he is a former board member, actually, of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. He served under Dr. Richard Land as a trustee for the commission. And but I say we need to be praying for him. And that was part of the video that we sent out where I was chatting with him, because the time right now in Washington, and especially as you alluded to with the slim majority, every day is just a tough day for him. We were talking about the possibility of defunding Planned Parenthood, which has long been something that has been committed to by conservatives on Capitol Hill. And my point was, well, you have a Republican White House, you've got a Republican Senate, you have a Republican House. I would submit now is the time to follow through on that commitment. And Speaker Johnson, his commitment to it is ironclad. At the same time, because he only has a 2-seat majority, which is getting ready to go down to a 1-seat majority as soon as Congresswoman Stefanik resigns her seat to become UN ambassador. So even knowing that he personally affirms it and wants to get it done through what's called reconciliation, he just has to sit there and think, all right, if we try and push this, is that going to cause me some issues over here with somebody else that might not either agree with it or might be in some district? So he's just got a lot of variables that he has to be thinking through. But I think when you take all that into account, he's doing really an admirable job. And he is a deeply faithful man. He prays continuously. And I think if he were in a room with you, with me, or with any of your listeners, they would feel right at home with him. This is a man who he's just a creature of the Southern Baptist Convention.
Right.
So he talks just like we do. And I'm so appreciative that he's in the role that he's in.
Well, we have another good Southern Baptist, and Mike Huckabee, who's the ambassador to Israel, if that is all approved, or become that. And that's going to be interesting. A lot happening in the current events there, too. And so we...
Yes, and you know what? I was just this morning meeting with a delegation from Israel, and we were just talking through some ways that we can work together. We've got some plans for some activities that we're going to do with the Israeli embassy up in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that they brought up was the fact that they're thankful that Mike Huckabee has been named as ambassador to Israel. So they're really appreciative of that.
I first met Mike in 1994. I was going to Israel with a group, my wife and I, and he was Lieutenant Governor of Arkansas. Then we met. Back then, you could move around on a plane and talk, the good old days. And he, as Lieutenant Governor, he said, "Well, when I get back, I'll be governor." The current governor is having to resign because of scandal. And he and I served. When he was president of the Arkansas Baptist Convention, I was president of Alabama Baptist Convention. So I met him back in 1990, 1991, and I followed him with interest. Been around him a little bit. And I do think that this is a dream job for him, and it's a hand in glove kind of experience. He'll do well there. We have some other good people we could talk about endlessly, but we want to thank you for availing yourself today. We know you're on a tight schedule. You have something else you have to get to, and we realize this recording will be out there soon, and we'll kind of give you a notice on it, and our listeners will have an opportunity not only to hear it, but it also be posted on YouTube. So we look forward to seeing greater things in the days ahead, and we know there'll be a lot of bumps in the road. That's life, the messiness of life. But we want you to know, Brent, we'll be praying for you. We're glad you and your family are doing well, especially those precious children in the events that took place a couple of years ago. And you have friends in Alabama Baptist Life. We're glad to have partnered with you on a Psalm 139 project to help. Oh,
yeah. Always looking forward to that. We just did one recently down there.
Yeah, that's right.
We're so thankful for you.
Yes, sir. And if you need us, be sure and call. But before we sign off, I always ask guests how we can pray for you. So would you like to share just in general how we could pray for you, or specifically?
Yeah, well, you know what? I'll come back to what you brought up at the beginning. It's coming up in March on 2 years since that horrific day for my children, and I was actually just telling someone who has also dealt with that kind of tragedy in their life earlier today. That in many ways it feels like the 2-year mark might actually be a little bit more difficult than the 1-year mark. And so I would just pray for the Lord to be kind in the season that's coming, and that we would navigate it well with our children and help them realize, hey, you survived it. It was an awful, terrible day. You lost some really good friends and teachers, and yet God is still good. And we don't find our identity in that dark day, but instead we find it in the light that is Jesus Christ. And so just help us, or give us wisdom to minister in that moment to our own children.
Exactly. And we'll be praying for daily wisdom for you in regard to your current role. One thing quickly came to my mind, and I'll say this. In parenting, I read something many, many years ago. Children are keen observers, but poor interpreters. Now, they observe more than we think, and they interpret things differently than we might imagine. And our part, of course, with children and grandchildren is help them interpret it as well as possible. And that's what you're doing. I want you to know we understand to the degree we can that life's tragedies come as they do. But you're up to the task, and not only in your parenting role, but in your present role. And we'll be praying for you. We thank you for your time. Blessings to you, and we'll look forward to connecting with you real soon. God bless.
Grateful for you, Dr. Lance.
Yes, sir.
Bless you, sir.
Thank you, listeners, for being a part of One Mission podcast. We've had Brent Leatherwood, our friend at the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention. God bless you all.